Boom. All right. So I should be recording. I hope so, because if not, people will be upset because I told them I was going to. So here we go. All right, guys. My name's Will Story. I've been in the business for about 7 years. I've sold a few houses. I think contracts are a big, big deal, right? They are what get us into court and get us out. They're what help us, really provide. They set the terms for our clients, how we're going to work with them, and all those different pieces. So I think contracts are a really, really big deal. So definitely know your contracts inside and out. The lovely thing about 2021 is they're really not making that many changes. Get aware of what they are making, but they're very limited, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to go through this top to bottom, and I'm going to go through it in a teacher mode for you guys as agents. And then I'm going to go through it top to bottom a second time. The second time when I do it, I'm going to be going through it as if I was going through it with a buyer, because I do not go through it as in depth. My question to a buyer is always, do you want me to go through this word for word with you, or would you prefer me to paraphrase it? And thank God they always say paraphrase. So with that in mind, I'll do that second. So it'll be both ways of doing it. I'll tell you guys this, the question and chat box, I am very bad at monitoring when I teach these classes. If you have a question, just unmute yourself, please, and ask, because otherwise I probably won't see it and I will miss it. And if you are not asking a question, please keep yourself muted so that we don't have all that side chatter. Fair enough, guys? All right, here we go. So I'm going to have my mouse on the screen to kind of point stuff out as we go, right? So this first section here, just letting you know, it's been approved by the Colorado Real Estate Commission. And when do we actually have to start using it? Well, it's mandatory as of January of this year. So I hope this is the buyer agency you're using. These first three things here are really just disclosures, right? The first one's letting you know this is a big deal. It's a contract, a binding contract with tax and legal consequences, right? So that's just a disclosure. Also, just so you all know, you cannot tell your client, because it's not the truth, that compensation is set by law or your brokerage firm, right? I've heard people, I've heard agents say to clients, hey, I have to charge this admin fee. It's required by law or something like that. No fees, no commissions are required by law. That's a business decision that you make as a business owner. This last disclosure here is saying that, hey, look, you can be a buyer's agent, seller's agent, transaction broker. We have different relationships. This contract is only going to govern two of those, either buyer agency or transaction brokerage, right? Now, the big difference between the two, and a very simple way of saying it, is a buyer's agent is like a coach or a lawyer, and a transaction broker is like a referee or a judge. So the buyer's agent can be there to advise you and guide you through the process at a high level, like a referee or like a coach would do for you or your lawyer. Now, a transaction broker is more there for right and wrong answers and just to say, you can do this, you can't do that, more like a referee or a judge. And when we get to section 5, we'll look a little bit closer at these two relationships that you can have. The date that I put here is always the date that I write the contract. This right here is outlining this first section here. Most contracts kind of outline stuff, right? So this is outlining who this agreement's between, right? So it's between the buyer and the brokerage firm. I believe all of us on here with Keller Williams Realty downtown. So it's really between the buyer and Keller Williams. However, we are empowered to sign it on behalf of Keller Williams, right? So if you even look, the brokerage firm receives the compensation, not us. And then our ICA with the office delineates how we get paid from the brokerage firm. So the buyer, the seller, they don't pay us. It's Keller Williams downtown. So we're in a multi-person firm. Okay, if you're going to be in a one-person firm, that's like if you just go out on your own, you open Will Story Real Estate, and it's just you, one license. So we're a multi-person firm. I think we have like 320 agents in the office right now, roughly that amount. Down here, we're going to define these terms. So first off, what I mean by can someone mute themselves? If you're not muted, please mute yourself. We're going to define terms. Now, a defined term is a few things. Like the word buyer. Is it like, me the buyer, you the buyer? What buyer is it? So we're defining the actual buyer, right? So it wouldn't be class 1 template. It'd be John Smith or whatever their name is. It could be an LLC, but it's going to be defining what buyer it is. Is it the buyer of this house, that house, which house? We don't know. It's this buyer, right? So that defines that. Again, what brokerage firm? Keller Williams Realty downtown LLC, guys. You got to add that on there. And then the broker, right? Now, I have a team. I don't put my team name on there, right? I put my name on there. And same with brokerage firm. It's not my team. It's my brokerage. As you see with all these, for example, property, they're going to define what that means as well. Now, property here is defined differently than it is in the contract to buy and sell real estate, right? So property means the real estate that fits the needs acceptable to the buyer, where the property in a contract to buy and sell real estate is the property we're under contract on. So different definition, and that's what we'll do in these. What's up, Whitney? No? Okay, thought we had a question. The big thing about these defined terms, if later I write something in additional provisions about the buyer, see how it's a capital B? It has to be capital B buyer later on if I use that as a reference, because it's been defined. Buyer with a capital B is this buyer on my contract. Any other buyer, I don't know what they are. So that's how that works. Going on down, my big thing on purchase and lease, purchase versus lease, if you know how to do leases, you can do them. If you don't know what you're doing, and just the fact that you maybe signed a few leases when you were in college, that does not mean you're competent in a lease. So be careful that if you're doing a lease, that you actually know how to do a lease, right? There's a lot of implications around leases. It's not something I'm confident in myself. I would review and sign one for myself, but I would not feel confident guiding someone through that process. So if you're going to be doing leases, make sure that you're competent in that. That's the big piece that I will say on that. And if you want to get competent on it, we'll go find a property manager to educate you, right? Because you want to make sure you know the lease inside and out. Going on down to here, your listing period, it's going to be this time frame or once the purchase happens. So one or the other, right? So if you buy a house in 30 days, you're not going to get all the way to December of next year. However, if you can't ever find the house, you could make it all the way to December. 3.7 talks about terms, right? And how they work. So basically, if you put NA or the word deleted into a provision, it deletes the entire provision out. The other term that they define here is MEC, or mutual execution of contracts. That's when we all sign it. So days, does everyone know that the day does not end at 12 midnight? It actually ends at 11:59 p.m. So it's defining what a day is in here for our deadline section, which would be like right here, right? So it ends at the end of that day, unless you added a time to it as well. Computation of days, it's really only going to have impact on one deadline, because there's only one deadline in this contract, and that's the end of the listing period. So this day in the future, 12/2/2021, will it be extended if it's on a weekend or a holiday? I say yes, I will extend it because I don't know what that day is going to be. You could also put will not. Just be aware of what you're doing and what the implications are of whether you extend a deadline or not. Now, section 4, we're going to spend a little bit of time in section 4 because this is a big one. So a few things about section 4. The first one's saying, hey, if you check buyer agency, you're the buyer agent, right? If you check transaction broker, you're transaction broker. Pretty simple, right? So 4.2 is saying this. You can have an in-company deal. So that'd be like me and, I don't know, I'm just going to go through, I see on the screen over here, me and Whitney doing a deal, right? So we're different brokers, but we're in the same company, right? We're both Keller Williams Realty downtown. That is totally fine. This contract allows for that. No big deal. Compensation goes the way that it would go with any other broker, right? Now, if you're in company one broker, so that means I have a buyer and a seller. I'm one broker, right? That's what this is referring to. And if you're on a team, the entire team collectively is considered one broker. So you can't represent the seller on a team and a buyer's agent represent the buyer. If you're on a team, you're one broker, you're one entity, okay? So what we're getting at here is this, a few things. As the buyer's agent, so if the seller and buyer are both working with the same broker, now I have a few choices, right? So one, I can be just the buyer's agent, right? I can just do just that. And if I want to do that, I go to 4.3.1.2. So I can check this up front and say, hey, look, I will only be your buyer's agent. That's all I will ever be. Now, there's a reason that Damian Cox says never, ever, 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 ever check 4.3.1.2. And I would never, ever, ever check this because it's going to limit your abilities to work with that person, right? Let's just say that now my buyer wants to buy one of my listings. I cannot revert to a transaction broker if I check 4.3.1.2. Now, we could amend the contract and I could do it, but there's no natural way of doing it. So with that in mind, don't check this box. The first one on 4.3.1 says I'm your buyer's agent unless I have a relationship with both, right? And so with that in mind, I could stay as only buyer's agent, or if I haven't checked this box, which you never, ever, ever check, I become a transaction broker, right? So my buyer falls in love with my listing. I become a transaction broker. I get to represent both sides. Maybe I'm taking home more commission. It depends how you write your listing agreement. Maybe I'm not, right? Now, here's the problems we have in section 4. I am at a house, my listing, and I am doing a open house, right? Buyer walks in. I've never met this buyer in my life. I don't know them at all. And they love the house. And they're like, oh, we love it. And I'm like, oh, that's so great. I don't have buyer's agency with them. And so my seller is an elevated status. I have listing agency with my seller. John Smith walks in. I don't know him at all. He loves the house. A lot of agents will do this. Hey, I'll write the offer for you, John, and I'll be a transaction broker. So I will elevate you up and I'll de-elevate my seller. So my seller goes down to transaction broker, and I got the buyer from customer status up to transaction broker. How is that fair to my seller? It truly is not, right? Because I had previous responsibilities to them, and now I'm elevating you to the same status as them. That doesn't make sense. So in order for you to be a transaction broker and it to be fair, you must have a relationship with both before that comes together, right? So if you only have a relationship with one, you can't put them on the same line of responsibility. So that you have to be careful with that. Now, if my mom walked into my open house where I already have an elevated relationship with the seller, I don't know if I could say, well, my mom's down here, I don't really know her, right? Because I do know her. So with that case, you may have to make an exception. And really, if it's your mom, do you really want to be a transaction broker in the middle? Because again, how are you going to say that you didn't play favoritism? So with that in mind, you might want to refer your mom out, especially if she's like my mom. So with that in mind, don't check 4.3.1.2. And if you get in that position of transaction brokerage, just be aware, should they be on the same level? Because if it is the open house example and they come in, you don't elevate them. What you do is you just treat them as a customer. No big deal. So you can still work both ends essentially. You don't have the same duties to the customer. However, you limit yourself when you check 4.3.1.2. Does that make sense, guys? All right, I'll take the silence for yes. Oh, yes. One more thing on it. Yes? Okay, so here's the other thing I've got on it. So let's just say that I've checked 4.3.1.2 buyer agency only, and I have a listing agreement with the seller. So I've got relationship with both. Buyer comes into my open house, like I'm doing the open house for my seller. He just happens to walk in. He's like, oh, Will, this is your listing? I'm like, it is. He goes, I love it. I want to buy it. But I've checked 4.3.1.2. Well, how can I be a buyer's agent only and a seller's agent? I can't. So what I really will end up doing at that point is referring both of them out. Because I can't pick one. I can't say, well, the seller's kind of cool, I'll go with them. Or I like the buyer more. No. So if you check 4.3.1.2 and they fall in love with your listing, you've now gone from where you could have made a full commission to referring both out. So that kind of stinks. So do not check 4.3.1.2 because you don't want to be in that situation where you can't represent either side. Okay. Now, section 5. These are called our uniform duties. So do you guys know who we do these for? Does anyone know who we have to do these for? No? Anybody?
The principal?
The principal? What do you mean?
The client?
Yeah.
Or fiduciary duties?
It's actually because you default to transaction broker for everybody. So if you go into a relationship with anybody without a contract or without a buyer agency, you're automatically a transaction broker. So essentially you have to do these for the entire general public, right? So with that in mind, if you're, anyone that you come into contact with, once they start talking about things like their motivating factors and stuff like that, you're becoming their transaction broker. So with that in mind, you need to be careful. Yes?
Oh, I'm sorry. With that in mind, would they be a customer then? That's a when they define like an actual person in these contracts as far as like a transaction broker, the principal, this one's considered a customer because you're doing it for the public as a TB.
So yeah, if someone came in your open house, immediately you have to, these are obligations you have for everybody. Now, if you put into a brokerage disclosure that they are being treated as a customer and you define them that way, you don't have to worry about that. But short of defining them as a customer, you default to where you're a transaction broker for pretty much everybody. So, looking through all these things, if you're doing an open house, for example, if you're doing an open house, for example, you have to disclose the adverse material facts to everybody. You can't say, oh, I'm not going to disclose them to you, right? No, you have to do that for everybody. So if you look at all the different things, like if, you have to do this for everybody. So be aware of what your responsibilities are, because I think a lot of people don't know these, and these are them. So like when you're doing that open house, make sure you're disclosing those things. Now, the big thing that people get is a lot of people say, well, why should I go into buyer's agency, right? I don't know you yet, or maybe, hey, we'll do it at time of contract, right? Because I think probably about 80% of agents, I don't know for sure, but I imagine 80% probably sign this buyer's agency at the same time as they do the offer. So with that in mind, I don't understand how people do their job right. Because let's look at section 6. This is what you get with buyer's agency. So short of this contract being signed, you are not supposed to do these 3 things. So the first one, you're going to promote the interest of the buyer with the utmost faith, good loyalty, and fidelity, right? You're going to represent the buyer. So someone that you're showing houses to, you cannot promote their interest until this is signed. The other thing, you're going to seek a price and terms that are acceptable to the buyer. So you're going to negotiate. So if you haven't signed buyer agency, but you're on the phone with the listing agent, well, hey, would you take 500? What does this look like? And you're pre-negotiating the offer before you write it. Then you write the offer. You send the buyer the offer and the buyer agency. Well, you just negotiated for them without the power to do it. And the last one is you're going to counsel the buyer on any material benefits or risk of a transaction that are actually known by the broker. So with that in mind, when you're out there and they're like, whoa, what do you think about this? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? What risk do you see? How do you see this, the appreciation in the market? And what do you think about this, Will? So you sit there and you're counseling the buyer. You're advising them. You're not supposed to do that without buyer's agency. So whenever someone's reluctant to sign buyer agency with you, I go right to section 6 and I say, without this, I can't represent you, negotiate for you, or advise you. So do you want to go out and look at houses and not be represented, not allow me to negotiate on your behalf or advise you? Okay, let's get the buyer agency signed, right? So that's what section 6 really is. That's the power of the buyer agency, is just these 3 lines in this entire thing. So, and then the other power of it is section 7, which is how you get paid, right? And how do you guarantee pay, right? So with that in mind, there are a lot of options in 7. The biggest thing is here. So you have a success fee, right? So success fee, we get paid upon being successful, right? That's kind of how that looks. So with that in mind, you have to decide if you check 7.1.1, which I think is probably a good business decision, what are you going to do next? So you say, I'm going to get paid a success fee, and then you can decide on what that amount is. So it's 2.8%, right? That's what I'm going to get paid. Now, with that in mind, who's going to pay you? There's other options here as well, an hourly fee, a retainer fee. I don't know anyone that charges those. If you're charging a retainer, God bless you, because that's awesome. I would love to charge that. Right, but most people just go with 2.8%. So how are you going to get paid? When are you going to get paid? Well, first off, when is it earned? Well, it's not earned. If the seller decides not to close, so if any of the transaction fails to close as a result of the seller's default with no fault of the buyer, then it's been waived, right? You did not get to the finish line. You did not succeed. Now, if the transaction fails because the buyer defaults, right? The buyer does not close, the fee's not waived. So if your buyer decides to have cold feet at the last minute and you choose to, you really want your money, you can sue them at that point. So you have to make that business decision if you're going to make your money in lawsuits or not. But this will protect your commission right here. Going on down, who's going to actually pay it, right? So you have this success fee, who will pay? There's really 3 options here. I don't understand who checks this middle one. It just says the buyer's going to pay you. The other brokerage firm is not entitled to pay you. Now, what I believe is our MLS rules would override this. So our MLS has an agreement, right, where you offer compensation and you get paid. So I think that you'd still be okay if you check this, but I don't know why you would. Really, the 2 that I see that make sense to check are either 7.3.1 or 7.3.3. 7.3.1 is the listing brokerage firm or seller may pay. But if they don't, so let's just say they only offer a 2% commission or something, your buyer is on the hook. So if the seller is offering 2.8 and you have 2.8 up higher in the contract, you will get your 2.8 if you check 7.3.1. However, if the seller's only offering 2% and you have it as 2.8, well, if you check this first box here, your buyer's obligated to pay that extra 0.8%. So that's when you can go to your buyer. So if you see a discount brokerage offering a lower commission, you can go to your buyer and say, hey, look, they're only offering 2%. So with that in mind, our buyer agency says that I'm owed 2.8. Would it be okay if I ask the seller to pay me the additional 0.8%, or would you like to do it at closing? And most buyers say, well, just let's write it into the offer so that the seller pays it and not me at closing. However, if you have not put that the buyer has any obligation to pay you, I don't understand why you should ever put into a contract to buy and sell real estate that your commission goes up, because it's not, that actually hurts the buyer when you put that into an offer. The only way it helps a buyer is if they're obligated to pay and it takes that obligation and rolls it into their loan, right? That could be advantageous for a buyer. But just straight up saying, hey, buyer, the commission's a little low, can I write mine higher? How is that in their best interest? And I only think it is when they have a loan, or when they have the ability to not have to bring it to closing and wrap it into a loan. Right? Like on a $500,000 house, if they're only offering 1.8% commission and you have 2.8, that's $5,000 in additional money the buyer would have to bring to closing. So they'd probably say, yeah, write it into the offer and roll it into my loan, kind of thing. Now, if you check 7.3.3 right here, it says listing brokerage firm and or seller may pay. Buyer is not obligated to pay. So with this in mind, if the commission is only $100, that's all they've offered. That's truly what you have to accept, because your buyer has no obligation to pay you, right? So with that in mind, you have to make that business decision where you want to be. And I know people out there, I have a friend that's an agent, he charges 3% to every buyer. Now, if you're going to do that, be prepared to justify your value. Either way, you should be prepared. There are some class action lawsuits going on right now that may sever buyer's agent commission away from listing agent commission. Because right now, it's all packed in together, right? The listing agent goes in there, they sign the contract, they get all the commission negotiation done up front, right? But there's some two class action lawsuits that may actually make it to where listing commission cannot encompass the buyer's agent commission as well. If that happens, you better be ready to fight for your commission. So know your value so that if you ever want to go with 7.3.1 and make sure you're getting a full commission every time, you can explain to them why you are worth 2.8% or whatever percentage you choose to make that. Does that make sense?
Hey, Will.
Yeah.
Last year, so I'm actually a dual lender agent. So I was a friend of mine was actually the buyer's agent.
Huh?
The time I've seen the actual this actually happen, when the seller could not sell the house, it was like a day before closing, and the title company ordered payoffs, and they discovered they had a CHFA loan that had to be paid off.
Oh, wow.
So she was negative
Huh.
in cash to closing. And so there was a fight between Keller and the actual listing company or agency. And I don't know whatever actually transpired, but she was with us at the time at Keller. And I had to pull Justin and those guys in it, because she was like, what do I do? Like, legally, they owe you the commission because it's the seller's default.
Why?
Well, they said that what I understood from the conversation was we were clear to close. So the loan was good. Everything was good. We're going to closing. And the listing agent discovered through the title company that they had the CHFA repayment, not the grant, but the second mortgage.
Yeah, I understand.
And so she had an upside down payoff because she owed more, she almost owed the full sales price, plus she owed the commissions, and she was short cash to close.
The seller owed money to the buyer's agent?
So the seller would have, the seller the seller canceled the contract maybe 48 hours before closing, and we didn't understand why. And finally, we discovered that when you have a CHFA loan, the grant is waived. So when you borrow $13,000, the grant goes away. Well, a year and a half before, she had purchased the house, and she had done the second lien grant, which gave her $16,000. So that's a repayment. So that's a second mortgage. So the seller didn't realize it. The listing agent never didn't ask any questions, but her payoffs were too high, so she owed all the commission.
So I understand that. So the seller couldn't perform, right? So the seller defaults.
Yeah, that's it. The seller could not perform.
Well, I'm not talking about that. May be a part of an MLS rule, and if that is, that's something different. I'm going purely based on this. And I mean, if you read it, the success. I mean, right here in 7.1.1.3, the success fee is earned by the brokerage firm upon the purchase of the property and is payable upon closing of the transaction. So if we close, we've earned it. If any transaction fails to close as a result of the seller's default with no fault of the part of the buyer, the success fee will be waived. Based purely upon this contract, there's no money owed to the brokerage. Now, MLS rules may be different, but I can tell you, based on buyer agency, there is no money owed.
Oh, so that was actually, I was led to believe.
Now you might not be wrong. Based on MLS rules, which I'm not as familiar with, it could be an MLS rule. Does that make sense? But I mean, based on buyer agency, it's pretty clear. If it's seller defaults, it's waived. If the buyer defaults, it will not be waived. So with that in mind, it may be some MLS rule. I'm not totally sure. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Were you saying that maybe they're the seller's not going to be responsible for the buyer's commission anymore? Is that what you're saying?
Possibly. I mean, so in a listing contract, it says it's called sales commission, right? It's not called listing commission, buyer agent commission. It's sales commission. Out of that, there's buyer's agent compensation, right? So you negotiate the entire commission with a piece going to the buyer's agent. There are 2 class action lawsuits going on right now and they've been going on for a while. These take time, but they're both saying that it's a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act that the sellers are doing this. They are taking away the negotiating power with the buyer's agent. There's a lot and NAR just had this big settlement with the Department of Justice. And from what I understand, the implications of that aren't even fully clear yet. But the whole idea is a lot of people say, wait, why should I have to pay every buyer's agent 2.8% or whatever? Why can't we negotiate that differently each time? Why should it all be packed in together? Why should the seller be paying the buyer's agent's commission? So that's what these 2 things are about. I don't know when they'll be figured out. I talked to Damian Cox about this about a year ago. And I don't know. I mean, he thinks that he's pretty sure that it'll be severed. I don't know. I don't watch the case law as close as he does. I don't understand it as much as he does. But if it is severed immediately, it's going to be every buyer's agent out for their own commission. And if that happens, there's going to be a lot of people that say, I'll do it for 1% or 1.5 or 2%. So why are you worth 2.8? That'll be the whole issue there. So you better be able to justify your value if that happens. And hey, why not be able to justify your value? You better be able to say why you're better than all the other buyer's agents. I mean, what I hear all the time is buyer's agents just say, oh, you don't pay my commission, it's paid by the seller. Actually, if you look at NAR's settlement fee or their settlement, there's something about where you're not supposed to say that anymore if you're a realtor. So I don't know if you're a realtor or not. You're supposed to be with our office. So with that in mind, you're supposed to not be saying the seller pays all my commission anymore. That's not supposed to be a phrase we use because the seller really doesn't pay it, right? It's packed into the purchase price. So I would just be aware that if you cannot explain why you're worth 2.8, then you have a scripting issue and an understanding your value proposition issue. And that's for a different class. If anyone wants to work on their value proposition, what you do specifically for buyers, like for example, one thing I do differently for buyers, one of my buyers wanted a condo in a certain complex, didn't get it. My team went out and door knocked that complex yesterday, right? We don't just wait for something to come on the market, and we tell our clients that. So what is your value to your client? You have to decide on that so that you can decide what your commission is, not just take what you're given. Does that make sense? I'm assuming you get that. All right.
Sorry, yeah.
Huh?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so Section 8, guys, at the end of the day, if you're getting money from other people, any third-party compensation, your buyer has to agree to it, right? So if you're getting money from your inspector or anything like that, or if you're recommending like, oh, this carpet guy's great, and you're getting some compensation based on, you have to be disclosing these things and get their permission. So if you own like part of your inspection company or something that your client's going to use an affiliated business arrangement document and disclose it to them. because with that in mind, you're being fully open. The last thing you ever want is for this to come back and they say, oh, you own part of that title company or this or that you recommended to us and you didn't disclose it. So that's all they're saying is if you're getting third-party compensation, let them know what it is so they can agree to it, right? And that's what it says right here. You know, they have to sign off and written consent for it, right? So right here, the same to the buyer in section 9, this is a really big one, that they are or they are not in a listing agreement with another buyer's agent right now. And then the second part is saying if they're not in that agreement anymore, did that last agent that they work with submit a list of properties? Why does that matter? Because of the holdover period, which we'll get to in a minute. So you need to find out up front, have they or have they not already said, hey, these are the properties that I'm submitted. Because if they have, you may not get paid on those and there may be commission issues. So that's what 9 is. When we get to holdover period, we'll talk more about what the submitted property means and looks like. Section 10, this is how we cancel a contract, right? For us, we have to show that the buyer has the right to cancel if we've breached the contract, right? So they have a few different examples in here. There's 6 of them. They don't sound that good, right? You abandoned your buyer. You failed to fulfill any of your uniform duties. I mean, you don't want to be accused of these things. My whole thing is this. If any of my buyers went out of a contract, I will let them out. Same with sellers. I'm not going to sit there and get put in front of DORA because they think I violated one of these things. I don't want my reputation messed with on social media. So if you guys want to hold a buyer to a contract, you can. I do believe if someone wants to cancel a contract, my philosophy is let them go. Now, if you want to get out of a contract, you have to show that the buyer is failing to cooperate with you, right? So that's kind of a onerous statement that they're not cooperating with you. So with that in mind, you're pretty much stuck with your buyer. Now, I will tell you, I have in my contract, it says at any time for any reason, any party may cancel. There's more verbiage to it than that. But the whole idea is if I have a buyer that I don't like, I'm not going to stick with them. You know, I show them 100 houses, they won't make an offer. I'm done. Or we get to inspection and they keep killing it over and over. I don't want to be stuck with them. So I just give myself the right to get out of a contract and then the right out of it. But that's how you want to run your business. But I would not keep someone in contract that is not happy with you. It's not going to help. Section 11, cost of services, right? You don't have to pay your buyer's bills is what this is basically saying, right? So your buyer, they're going to have all these things they order, inspections, whatever, appraisals. You're not on the hook for those bills. Okay, unless you have a written agreement that you would pay them. Going on down, this is going to say, you know, what we're actually going to do. What are our brokerage services, right?
Hey, Will,
Yeah.
just a real quick question on that.
Yeah.
I was told by an agent years ago, maybe over a decade ago, when we bought like our home, that they couldn't pay, like assist in the inspection for any potential issues in the future and to always avoid that. So I've always in my back of my mind, you know, always known like never pay the inspection because it opens up the can of worms for me being onus of those futuristic issues that come up
What do you
after
mean?
they own. Is that true?
I don't know what Julie, I'm sorry. You got to explain that again.
So my cousin represented us in our purchase of our house years and years ago.
Okay.
And my ex-husband at the time asked him if they would pay the inspection. And she said no, that one time they had paid the inspection and the buyers came back later on and sued them for some issue that the inspector missed. Because she was the rightful owner of the inspection, she no longer helps clients with inspections.
I mean, you can sue for anything. And whether you pay for that inspection report or not, in that situation, whether the agent had paid or not, they probably still would have been sued, right? Because who recommended the company? I don't think it matters whether you pay or not. I think once you recommend somebody, you are opening yourself up to the liability if they don't perform or if they miss something or mess something up, that you could be sued. Now, will you lose? That's a different story. And a judge could decide that case either way, I imagine, depending on the supporting evidence. So I don't know. I mean, I fronted the money for like I had a guy that was selling a house and buying. He didn't have the money for his inspection, but he had a ton of equity. I fronted the money for it. I mean, that's a decision that you can make, how you want to do it. I don't know if paying for the inspection really makes you more liable. I'm not an attorney, but I think that once you recommend the inspector, I think the liability is probably the same amount, whether you pay or not. I think that's almost immaterial, but I don't know. I'm not a judge. Does that help, Julie?
Yeah, that does.
So down here in section 12.2, you're just going to be saying, hey, look, we're going to be looking at properties we're going to be using showing methods. And here's where I can pull property from, right? The multiple listing service I can pull property from. So for me, I have RE Colorado, I have Iris. Hey, great news. You know, we all have Iris now, right? Because RE Colorado and Iris share. So you can put just RE Colorado. You don't have to list both because of the data share. I actually do have an Iris account, and then I have Pikes as well. So list out your MLSs here. That's all it's saying. Section 13 is saying that you do or you do not have permission to disclose the identity to third parties about the buyer. Now, I don't believe that's just their name. I think that's things about them as well. So I always see that I can do it. So for example, if I have a veteran, I want to be able to say they're a veteran because people love veterans. You know, I want to be able to disclose things about my buyer's identity. It's not usually the name. So I generally check does. And I tell my buyer, I say, hey, when we get to the section, I'm like, hey, you know, I say, if I believe it's going to help push the transaction forward, I may disclose things about your identity. Is that okay? And they say, yeah, that's fine. Cool. I can see maybe if you're working with athletes or famous people or something like that, you may want to say does not. But short of someone that has, stardom or famous, I don't know why you would choose does not. I mean, maybe if they're a politician or something like that. Disclosure of settlement services in 14, this is literally just a disclosure, right? That you can get different people and they cost different amounts of money to do different things for you. 15 is saying, hey, another disclosure, there is wire fraud that can happen, right? We're all aware of these wire frauds. So that's what that is saying right there. 16 is awesome. I love this one because you guys ever had that buyer that calls you after closing like, hey, my house is still all over the market. The photos are up and I'd like them down. Well, this alleviates that for us, right? Buyer acknowledges that marketing material may be used by the seller and seller's broker, and it may be difficult, if not impossible, to remove, right? So with that in mind, you know, we can't get the photos of your house down. We can't get the photos of your kid's bedroom off the internet. You guys know how it is. You put it on the internet, it's out there, right? So that's just letting them know that. Non-discrimination, we can't discriminate, right? So, you know, here's like a thought on that. You look at two houses, they're very, very similar, like the same house, right? One is owned by a little old lady. It's got old people furniture. It smells like mothballs, you know, and it's just an old person house. The other one is a young person house with a little like playground thing in the back and all that. I feel like, man, we just love the feel of this house because of the young family that's in here. Well, familial status is a reason to discriminate or protect a class, something that you're not supposed to discriminate against, right? So at the end of the day, your buyer should not be making decisions upon, wow, this is like a family house and this is like a single person house. I mean, it's more about the house, not the decorations. But I don't see this as much of an issue in buyers. It's more on the listing side that discrimination comes up. But just keep in mind, we're not allowed to discriminate based upon any of these different protected classes. And in certain places, for example, I don't know if it's Colorado Springs or El Paso County, but one or the other, you can't discriminate based on military status. So if you're with like a guy that's in the Navy and he walks in, he's like, oh, the guy in here is an Air Force one. I would never bid on an Air Force house. You actually can't do that down there. In Gunnison, you can't discriminate based on political affiliation, right? So there are sometimes other things in there. At the end of the day, guys, focus on the house, right? Not the owner. Don't worry about their pictures and their family. Just focus on the house, right? This right here, 18, is just saying, hey, look, you may want to get legal and tax counsel. They actually have this at the very beginning as well, right? Of the contract. This is a big deal. I don't know how many people actually get attorneys or talk to their tax accountant, but they might want to. Section 19, mediation. If me and my buyer get into an argument and have an issue, prior to court, we're going to try in good faith to go to mediation, right? That's going to be our first stop before going to court. Now, if we do go to court, there's attorneys, right? And it says in section 20, in the event of court, or arbitration or anything like that, whoever wins gets all their attorney fees paid. So you might say, heck, I know I'm right. I'm going to go in there and I don't care that my attorney will cost me 10 grand because they're going to reimburse me. Well, that is not always true. Judges, even though the contract is very clear, prevailing party, all reasonable costs and expenses, including legal and attorney fees, right? Well, the judges can overrule that. So with that in mind, don't go to court thinking I'm protected and any of my expenses are protected because they are not always. Section 21, this is where you're going to put any additional provision. So I have two additional provisions in my buyer agency that I use as standard. One is, and I'll just pull it up really quick. and you can put whatever you want in here. Just make sure what you put into here makes sense and you're okay with it. Oh, that's not all of them. So I have this last one on here. I don't use all these anymore. At any time for any reason, any party disagreement may terminate by delivering written notice, right? So I put that in every time. If there's someone I don't want to work with or something like that, I can send them an email and terminate with them. If they don't like me, they're not stuck with me, right? I also have another disclosure that I put into mine that mentions everybody on my team. It's a team disclosure. I write out everyone that's licensed on my team to protect us, because at the end of the day, we are one entity, right? Going on down, these are the different ways that we can deliver information, right? So for example, physical delivery, they can mail stuff to you, right? They can mail it to the office. Electronic notice, that can be fax, email, or blank. You can put text if you want. You know, that's up to you if you want to run your business like that. What I would not put is internet. I've seen that many times, and I don't know what that means. Does that mean someone can pop up in my TikTok, pop up in my Facebook messages? Who knows what that means, right? Put a comment on my business page that I miss. I don't want to miss any important information. So maybe you put text. I would not go with internet because that is such a wide statement. I've seen a lot of people do it, and I don't think anyone really knows what that means, right? So with that in mind, that's how that works. Choice of law, if we get into an argument, we're going to go by Colorado law, right? Well, thank goodness. That's where we are. Modification of the contracts. If we're going to change anything, right? I'd love to do stuff on a handshake and a smile, but that's not how we do things. It is in writing if it's going to be enforceable, right? A counterpart would be if I met with someone's wife today and she signed a piece of paper, and then I also had emailed it to her husband and he signed a different one electronically. So it's not the same piece of paper signed. I didn't upload the wife's into CTM and add the signature line for the husband. They're two different ones. It's a counterpart, and together they're a full and complete contract. So they don't have to all sign the same piece of paper, right? Now, like in a closing document, we don't do counterparts, right? Everyone signs the same settlement statements and stuff like that. That's why we ship documents back and forth and we overnight them. But in buyer's agency, you can do counterparts. This is the entire agreement, right? All of this. So if there's anything else that you guys have agreed to, whether in writing or orally, it needs to be brought into this contract as an attachment. You would note it in section 22 and say we have an attachment of blank document, but you have to have it added to this document because this is all of it. You need to give a copy of the buyer. Actually, they get a copy of the contract, right? That makes sense to me. I like section 28 because section 28, again, takes stuff off of our back. And what that is if they're concerned about sex offenders, it is not up to us to figure out if there's a sex offender near that house. Who should they consult with? Local law enforcement, right? So that takes that onus off of us and puts it onto them. And then at the very end, the buyer signs, you sign, and that's it. You guys have any questions about buyer agency? I'm going to go back through it again and present it as if I do to an actual buyer. No? Cool.
We have a question.
Yeah, what's up, Gil?
How are you? So one of the questions that I have, because I encountered this over with the other companies that they do this, and our own company does the same thing once in a while, some brokers. Can you address this extra fee that we charge to the buyers when, is it the buyers or the sellers? Well, the sellers is another deal, but sometimes people charge it even to the buyers, the transaction fee. And the transaction fee, we are the ones who hire that transaction, but we made the buyer sometimes to pay for it.
So let me make sure I'm understanding, Gil. So you mean like you're representing a buyer and you have the 2.8% commission and a fee on top of that, like a buyer admin fee? Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually am a
see
huge fan of it, right? I used to always run a buyer admin fee. I haven't now for the last year and a half, but I used to always do it. I don't know. I go back and forth in my head. So what Gil's saying is on top of your commission, you get more money. So where you're going to address that is in 7.1.4, other compensation. And you're going to put, $4.99 admin fee or whatever it is, right? If you're going to do it, just don't lie about it. I've heard, and I mean, I'll be dead honest. I've been in our office and heard another broker on the phone say to the buyer, hey, I've got a $500 admin fee. It's required by law. Don't lie. Just tell them, say, hey, look, when I used to do it, I always printed this way. Hey, I've got a $4.99 admin fee. If I do my job, and only if I do my job right, I will get that from you at closing. Now, how that works, you guys, is you need to let the lender know and you need to let title know so that it goes onto the settlement statement. How do you get paid? It's treated just like commission. So if it's $500, let's just say it's $1,000, you're still going to pay $360 or 36% to Keller Williams unless you're capped, right? You still pay cap off of it. The IRS treats it just like commission and just like normal income, but it's a way to boost your stuff, right? So let's just say you sell 20 houses a year and you've put it at, $500. That's an additional what? 500 times 20, additional 10,000. It's not bad. Is that right? Yeah, $10,000. So you can get a lot of money doing it. I don't know. I struggle with it because I think
I struggle with it because, sorry to interrupt you, but I struggle with it because we had discussion with Marsha Waters, and then she doesn't see it right. I mean, in the sense of we are charging money on top of our commission that we already getting paid very well for it. No matter how bad, how good you are, you're getting paid well as a commission base. And then when we put that in there, she's looking into it really deeply because she considered that we're taking advantage of the public on that sense. I mean, that's her consideration, but we still having conversations, her and me, about it. Because I don't like it. I mean, when I go take a listing, and sometimes I take the listing just based on that, it's easier to go for the listing when I know the other broker is charging a transaction fee in there. So anyway, that's one thing that she sees not very well either.
And so, in case you guys don't know who Marsha Waters is, she's the head of the real estate commission, right? Is that right, Gil?
Yeah.
So she's
she was previously an investigator before she becomes the head of the commission. She was an investigator, and then she is responsible for a lot of people to go to jail for mistreating the customers. That's pretty much in her eyes, the customers first before us.
Well, and here's where I struggle, because I think we do get paid pretty well. But I have friends that do real estate in Alabama. You guys know the price point in Alabama is a little lower than here, right? I mean, they sell $80,000 houses, right? So with that in mind, if I was selling an $80,000 house, I might say to myself, I could justify it. But you guys, I don't know what your average price point is, but I do know the average price point of Denver Metro is over 500, I think, at this point. So with that in mind, if you're selling the average house and making a $15,000-ish commission, maybe your issue is on expense management if you have to charge an admin fee. Maybe you're just blowing your money on bad marketing or something. I don't get it, because I think at our price points, I think this makes no sense. I only see where it makes sense if you're in the Southeast, somewhere with low price points. But in Colorado, we're blessed, and I see it kind of like Marsha does, is some backhanded stuff. I'm not really a fan. I did it for a few years because I was taught to do it that way. I just haven't done it for about a year and a half because I had an ethical discussion with someone about it, and like I said, I can't justify it in my head. So
hey, Will, this is Julie again. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So when I seen it to be an advantage, and actually it was paid up front, the admin fee was during the 2008 to 2013 debacle, where it was really tough to even, get finance and back then. So I was seeing as a lender, $295 being charged by the buyer's agent just to take you out. And that was the admin fee. But as a lender, it makes it really difficult for us when we're trying to explain to a client, hey, you're going to come in with $100 for your closing costs, and I'm going to break that down for you. And then I'm told at the last minute, and I used to always ask, and it's not so popular anymore for that admin fee to go happen. But then you add the $495. So now my fee is $500 more. So now they're coming in with $6,300, and they look at me and they go, how did it go up? And I have to explain, that's your buyer's agent fee. So if you want to know what it's for, you have to call your buyer's agent, because that's not a lending fee. And then it turns, and I've had a lot of buyers go, well, why do we have to have that? And I'm like, that's really between you and your buyer's agent. I really can't. And I would try to cover it up, but as a lender, I'm 100% against it. During the debacle, I was 100% for it, because I saw my friends, like, I spent $30 in gas today, and then they never bought anything from me, and I took them out 10 times, and that's $300. So
Well,
that's the one time I would say I did see a benefit to it.
Well, Julie, back then houses were what, 150,000?
Yeah, 275,
You know what I mean? Like, it's a little different.
325.
They've more than doubled since then. And then the other
Yes.
thing is this: if you take your friend out and you go spend $30 in gas and they're not approved for a loan, we made a bad business decision by taking them out before they were fully approved for a loan. That's just my opinion. But either way, if you want to charge admin fee, it's in Section 7, other compensation. Feel free to do it. I don't personally believe in it, but that's just me. I don't know. Do what you want, though. You make a lot of extra money, and you can also come off as a used car salesman. So however you want to present yourself, right? Yeah, because I mean, I imagine that was really awful. They were like, "Oh, my agent's charging this." And you're like, "Yeah, I don't know why, but they are." That must have been awkward. So, so I'm gonna go through this
I have
now.
a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just wondering, how much do you typically charge then for like a listing agent? Because that's like the hard part, right? Like buyer agency is a lot easier, like so to speak, than being the listing agent, right? So, I mean, do you charge like 3% typically for the buyer's agent, or like I know, and I do realize it's negotiable, but just wondering for like guidelines.
Sure. So I mean, for my listings, I generally charge 6%, and I take 3.2, and I give 2.8 to the buyer's agent. So that's what I do. I mean, I see it all sorts of different ways, but I mean, I charge 6%, and half goes to, I mean, essentially half, right? 2.8 goes to the buyer's agent. And I can tell you, there's markets where it's 3% and 3%. If you go to Fort Collins, it's usually 3 and 3, right? Once you get north of about Firestone, we go to 3% buyer agent. Once you get south of Castle Rock, buyer's agents get 3%. Why in Denver is it 3.2 and 2.8? I don't know. I know in Omaha, for example, it's 2.4 to the buyer's agent. Why? I don't know. 3.6 to the listing agent. I don't know. That's just how the standards have been set and where we practice. But I generally do 3.2 for myself on the listing, and I do 2.8 on the buy side. I mean, do I negotiate my commission? You bet I do. Right? We're in a very hard market to get listings. Does that help answer it for you?
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, guys. So I'm going to go top to bottom as if you were a buyer. So you'll see I'm going to skip major sections. And I mean, if they ask me a question, I understand that section, so I can go back to it. Oh, I don't know how I did this, guys. I actually skipped holdover period. Because I remember I said I was going to talk about something on holdover period, and I did not go into holdover period very much with a buyer. So holdover period, guys, again, you know, if you stop working with somebody and they go buy a house, what are you going to do? You're going to really sue them for commission. That's up to you. To me, how I look at holdover period, it's more to give them a little bit of fear. But if they go do something during the holdover period after we've kind of separated, it just is what it is in my mind. So first thing you're going to do in here is put a number, right? So I say 90 calendar days. I don't know. That's what I see most people do. So that's what I've always put there. So if in 90 calendar days, first off, there's going to be a few things that happen. If they go, we're not working together anymore, me and this buyer, right? And they go within those 90 days, they go to the property that I've already negotiated on. So I helped them negotiate a little bit on that, but it did never come to fruition. And I had to, when we separated, submit its address or other description in writing to the buyer. And I have to do it during the listing period. It can't be 2 weeks after. It has to be before we part ways. So with that in mind, remember I said earlier, did they submit a list, yes or no? This is where it matters, right? That's what you have to do. Oh, and also, if you read this part here, you have to charge a successive fee. And with that in mind, you have to have it where the buyer's obligated to pay. So depending on how you check section 7.3 and 7.1, the holdover period may not even matter. For example, if you check 7.3.3 where buyer is not obligated to pay, then you're out of it, right? You have to check 7.3.1 for the holdover period to even matter. So with that in mind, you have to hit all these different parameters and then go to court to sue them for the commission you didn't get. So, they go buy a house with a different agent, one that you've already negotiated on. You told them, hey, I negotiated on it because here's the list of properties. Then that's how you get paid. But you also have to do it through court. So good luck with your holdover period. I personally don't really think it's much of anything. It is there to protect you. I tell the buyer about it. I'll tell you what I'm going to say about it in just a second. But the real whole idea on it, in my opinion, is it's just to give them a little bit of fear. So here's how I present the contract top to bottom to a buyer. All right. So first off, I say, hey, Mr. Buyer, do you want me to present this to you word for word, or would you like me to paraphrase it? They always say paraphrase. I say, awesome. So, hey, y'all, just so you know, this contract, and I literally have it like this because we're usually made face-to-face. Now, if we're doing it on Zoom, it's different. But I'll have it to where it's upside down, and I'm running my pen where my mouse is. That's how I do this. So I'll go to this with my pen right here. I'll say, hey, guys, these first three here are just saying that this is a legally binding contract. It may have tax and legal consequences. You should, if you want, talk to a lawyer, talk to your accountant. So that's what this is saying here. This is a required form by the Real Estate Commission. It has been approved by them. Why do I like to throw in there that the Real Estate Commission's approved this form or that they've required it? Why? Because then they trust the form. They may not know me that well, but they probably trust the state of Colorado a little bit. So then I get to this section. I say, hey, guys, I can be your buyer's agent or your transaction broker. Basically, I can be your coach or your referee, and we'll go through that relationship a little bit further going down. I'm in a multi-person firm. What that means is there's more than one agent in my office. There's about 320 right now. Your name is John Smith. Did I spell that right? Awesome. My brokerage firm is Keller Williams Realty Downtown. You'll probably be primarily dealing with me, Will Story. We're not looking at a lease. We're looking at a purchase, so we'll skip on over there. The listing period is going to go from today for a whole year because, I don't know, maybe we may put this off, maybe we won't, but as soon as we find the house and close, that ends our contract. Going on down, that future date that says when our contract will end, if it's a weekend or a holiday, it'll be extended to the next business day. Here, what this is going over is if we have a deal where there's another broker involved. So if there's a different broker from within my office.
Is the sandwich okay?
Mute yourself. Thank you. So here I'll say, first off, if there's another broker in my office that is involved in the transaction, not someone from my team, then it operates like normal. However, if you guys fall in love with one of my listings or someone from my team's listing, then we have to become that transaction broker referee role. We cannot be a buyer's agent and a seller's agent all at once. That's called dual agency, and it's illegal in this state. So I'll be your buyer's agent unless me or someone on my team has a relationship with the other side. And then in that case, I would become that referee or that transaction broker. Section 5 is going over all the uniform duties I'm required to do for everybody. Section 6, though, this is what you get with buyer agency. First off, I'm going to promote your interests with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. I'm going to be in your corner. I'm going to be fighting for you and representing you. 2, I'm going to seek a price and terms that are acceptable to you. I'm going to negotiate on your behalf and get you the best price and terms we can that work for you. 3rd, I'm going to counsel you of any material benefits or risk involved in the transaction that are known by me. I am here to advise you throughout the transaction and make sure if something comes up that you're aware of it. Section 7, this talks about how I get paid. So I get paid a success fee. That means if I'm successful and we get to the finish line, we close the house, that's how I get paid. Now, with that in mind, I can tell you I don't charge an hourly fee or retainer. I only get that success fee. And it would be, and I can tell you guys this, I put 2.8 there, and then I get down to here, and I say, I don't check 7.3.1. I don't. You can tell you when to do it. So all I say to them is, so basically, guys, at the end of the day, the listing brokerage firm or the seller, they're going to pay me, not you. So that's how I do my business. You just have to script for whichever one you choose. The holdover period, this is how this works. If, we go look at a house, let's just say we go like for sale by owner and you love it. And then you call the owner after we leave, after we've negotiated a little bit on it, and I've done some work on it. You call them and say, hey, I just fired my agent. Why don't we just do it for 3% less since I don't have an agent? This is going to protect my commission. So if I do my job and I help you out, it'd be fair that I get paid, wouldn't it? The buyer say, yeah, that'd be fair. So that's what we'd say with holdover period. That's it. Let me say, and right here I just say, hey, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be paying for any of your inspections or nothing like that. That's on you. Right here, this is saying that you are not in agreement with another broker. Is that correct? Awesome, awesome. Now, if they say they are in one, well, then we'll have a different discussion. And I'll say, hey, have you been in agreement with another broker and they negotiated on any properties for you? No? And they didn't give you a list of any? Awesome. That's what this is saying. Here's your standard way to cancel the contract. I have a better way at the very end.
Well,
to you. Yes.
So sorry, I have a question. So like one of the scripts, I think that the Keller Williams Bold did when I took the class like back in August. They were saying, hey, you know what, sign this contract with me today. If you don't like it, you can call me later and I can rip it up. But going back over to like the holdover period and stuff, like where you say, hey, if I do my job right, I would like to get paid. How does that coincide with, you know, this script before where, oh, if you don't like me, we can just rip it up?
Well, I mean, technically, the contract. So you have to keep in mind, bold scripts and Keller Williams scripts are written for the whole country, right? So they're not specific to any state's contract. You know, they don't write like a Colorado one versus a Texas one or anything like that. So what they're saying is, because I know that script, and it's, hey, I want to think about it overnight. And they say, hey, look, why don't we go into contract right now? I can start working for you. And if tomorrow you wake up, you don't want to work with me, we can take this and just rip it up, right? That's kind of the idea of that script.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's where it's not going to impact the holdover period, because with that in mind, you're not going to go out and look at any houses. Is that what that script was based on? Was, hey, if you don't like me, we can just go our separate ways tomorrow? If they want to sleep on it and think about signing with you, I imagine that was the context of that script. And if that's the case, you're not going to have a holdover period because you're not going to show them any houses.
Hey, Will, I know that script is strictly used for listings.
Yeah, and that too, right, Ruth? Because with that, it's the listing's like, well, we want to think about it overnight. I mean, it could be used on a buyer too, Ruth, right? But yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea is, hey, you know, if you want to think about it, cool, why don't we go ahead and, you know, sign it now? And if you hate it tomorrow, you can rip it up, right? That's the idea of it. So, but it's not going to hit your holdover period because it's really for that buyer's remorse of hiring you. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess where I was kind of trying to tie this all in together was like where, you know, okay, sign the contract December 1st.
Mhm.
The holdover period starts from December 1st on. I mean, I guess if you never give them any.
No, it doesn't actually. So it's actually going to start. So let's just go up here, right? During the listing period of this, the buyer contract or any extensions also applies to the property contracted for or leased within 90 days after the listing period expires. So let's just say you signed a 3-month, or let's just say you signed a 4-month listing contract. So we get to the end of March and it's over, right? That's when the 90 days starts. Not when you sign the contract. So with that in mind, your holdover period starts when the listing contract expires. And you expire a contract when you fire somebody. When you terminate one, you're technically expiring the contract. So it's whenever your contract ends with them, whether it's canceled or it gets to the end and it naturally expires. That's when it'll happen. So with that in mind, you know, if they're like, well, I'm going to rip up this contract, I'm done with you a week in, but you have gone to a property, you have negotiated on the property, right? Because it says that in there. And you've said, hey, this is one of the properties I've given you I've submitted it to you and said, this is one of the properties I've negotiated for on your behalf. That's when it's going to apply. So they can cancel the contract 7 days in, and the holdover period would apply 90 days starting then. But you've had to negotiate on the property and submit its address in writing to the buyer during the listing period. So, and then you have to go to court to get the money. So I don't know. I mean, just make your clients happy and holdover periods won't be an issue.
What if you'd ever made the offer, Will?
You don't have to make
And
an
then
offer.
they terminate it, and then they go out and do it. They do it on their
make an
own.
offer. It says negotiated. So I could have like a text chain or an email chain between me and the other agent. You know, hey, what does your client think about this price, that price? I mean, this is where I'm not going to court for money.
Okay.
I mean, that's how I look at it, Julie, because how are you going to prove you negotiated it? Was that a big enough? Was it just talking to the other agent? Was it negotiating? Who's going to decide all of this? The judge. And so with that in mind, you could be paying an attorney $5,000, $10,000, and then spend all this time. And you guys got to understand, it's not just the time and the money. It's the negative energy. Do you know how negative going to court is and how awful it is? I've been to court multiple times in my life, and the negative energy created around it is awful. So I'm just telling you, I would stay away from it. But yeah, if you've negotiated the property, and you can prove that, and you submitted it to the buyer during the listing period. So if like your buyer sends you an email like, I don't want to work with you, I'm going to fire you, that's when you would submit it and send over a notice to terminate, right? Or not a notice to terminate, but a listing agreement amendment, right? That's when you would send that over. So, but
Hey, Will, I got an example of something that happens to me.
Yeah.
And for the new agents too, you know, happens as an old agent. But I send my contract They never sign it. They keep it there in their email. And then I went and showed them properties. They like one. We negotiate on that property. I never checked back that they haven't signed my buyer's agency contract. So then they didn't like the property. They decide not to buy that one because they say no. So we stop negotiation there. But then we go to see other set of properties. And those properties, they like one of those properties. I send them the contract. Then I realize that I don't have a buyer's agency with them. I ask them for it. And they say, we are looking at the houses for the second time. And I say, guys, we haven't made appointments. And they say, oh, that's okay. We're just driving outside. And then suddenly my lender called me and say, Gil, these buyers that I'm working with you, another agent is asking me for their qualification. I'm like, what's going on? So the buyers didn't call me anymore. What I find out later is that because I talked to that agent, that that agent grabbed them, and he tells me that on my face, and I think I deserve that. That was the most expensive lesson. He says, you were not professional enough to start negotiating without having your buyer's agency agreement signed. They told me they never signed it. They have it on the email. So for that reason, I have them here, and they signed me a contract right away. So I learned the really hard way because I lost the listing, I lost the buying, and the listing, and I lost them really because they called the lender, and the lender calculate my 6% commission or whatever, and he told them when he sells the house, he's going to charge you this much, and they got panic because now they're driving by one of those houses, have an open house. The agent is there, a Remax agent, and she grabbed them, and I asked her, I say, look, I let them go, referral agreement, nothing. She's like, no, you were not professional to have them sign up, so they're mine. And I lost them. And that was a really expensive lesson. So don't go out and show houses without having a buyer's agreement, guys.
I mean, guys, I'll tell you this. As soon as I meet with somebody, maybe they haven't gotten approved for a loan yet. Like maybe they're 3 months out. I want to buy agency signed right then because once they meet with me and we start talking, they're going to be like driving around some Sunday afternoon and say, oh, look, there's an open house. Let's just check it out. They go in. They love it. And that agent's like, well, I'll discount the commission and get you a better deal since you don't have an agent yet. And they're like, well, we're working with Will. Then they'll say, did you sign an agreement to work with Will yet? Well, not yet. We can get this house cheaper. Screw Will. Let's just get this house, right? So, yeah, they'll cut you out. This protects you, right? So going back to this is how I explain it to the buyer, right? So, guys, this is the natural way to cancel a contract. I have a better way to the very end. I'm not going to hold you to a contract. And that's because I do have that additional provision, right? So with cost of services, I just say, hey guys, at the end of the day, sorry, I got thrown off. So cost of services, guys, at the end of the day, I'm not responsible for paying for your inspections or anything like that. I will recommend people to you. That cost is on you. The places we're going to be looking at properties are in these 3 different MLSs. And if they're looking, up north, I'm going to tell them, we'll probably won't look in Pikes because that's down south. If they're looking in Castle Rock, I'll say, hey, we're probably not going to look in Iris because that's up north, right? Here I say, hey, I have the ability to disclose your identity. If I feel like it'll help promote and push the deal forward at any point in time, there will be things I will disclose about you. At the end of the day, guys, the rest of this is a lot of legalese. If you have any questions about any of it, let me know. But that's what all this is. It's just saying, like, for example, I can't guarantee that all the houses or photos of the house you buy will be brought off the internet. I can't guarantee that. And, like, for example, if we ever have a dispute, me and you, we'll end up in mediation before we end up in court. Do you guys have any questions about any of this? No? Let's go ahead and sign. So you guys see, like, I literally skipped over huge swaths of it. And if you want to present every line you can, that's up to you. That's how I present the buyer's agency. Any questions on that? No? Well, cool. Well, guys, if you guys ever want to reach out to me, you're more than welcome to. This is my cell phone right here, 720-975-7227. So feel free to call me, although I will tell you guys this. Call the contracts hotline. Don't call me. Call them. I'm actually going to be joining the contracts hotline and helping out on that. So if you call that, there's a chance you'll get me. But that is my cell phone. If you ever have questions about lead generation, any of that, feel free to call me as well. You can email me. Here's my email. I love talking about business and talking about different ways of getting it. I really enjoy what I do here. So, okay.
Hey, Will.
Yes, ma'am.
Just from my years in the other industry, as a recommendation to newbies, when the lender pre-qualifies your client, we have to ask for their legal name and how they're going to hold title. And there's so many times in 20 years where Tammy is her nickname. And so you write Tammy Smith, and I get the contract and her name is Eleanor Teresa Smith. And they go, and then underwriter can't underwrite on that contract because it doesn't match her credit. And it's happened so often over the years. I just wanted to FYI for all the newbies, like work with your lender and ask how they're actually holding title.
Yeah.
It'll help so much more issues that go to title company, to the underwriter, to everything, rather than having another addendum.
Well, and for example, guys, like on here, if I put, Tammy instead of whatever name, it's supposed to be like Samantha or whatever her full name is. When I'm writing an offer, I have a lender letter. I'm going to copy it exactly as on the lender letter, and then I'm going to amend this is what I'll do. But I always ask them, and I'll ask too with their name. I'll be like, did I spell it right? Do you want a middle initial? Do you want your middle name in there? And then, yeah, you're right, Julie. You have to have continuity between title, lending, and the real estate contract. Anyone else got anything? No? Well, guys, I will be teaching this class again. Not this one, but I don't know if you guys know, I do this as a 4-part thing. The next one will be the first Thursday of next year. So whatever that is. With that in mind, I think it's probably no, it will not be the first Thursday, because the first Thursday is New Year's Day. So we'll be doing it on the 8th next, the first Thursday is the 7th. Yeah. We'll be doing it on the 7th next month. It'll be contracts class again, but it'll be comment addendums and disclosures. And then in February, I'll do contract to buy and sell real estate. And then in March, I'll do the listing agreement. If you have questions though before then, feel free to reach out. I hope everyone has a great day. That's all I really got. So hope it was helpful. Good luck, guys. Have a great day. Enjoy your holidays.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Thanks, Wilbur.